Good morning or evening or afternoon, and welcome to this new episode of Irreverend with me, the Reverend Dr. Jamie Franklin. We are going to be discussing all the relevant issues of the day, talking about all the things, the football and all the racism. We will be talking about the coronavirus and all the recent developments there. We will also be talking about the Church of England and all sorts of things going on within this august institution. And of course, we will be raising the most pertinent issue of whether or not we will be able to marry robots in the near future. Joining me for this august discussion, of course, is the Reverend Daniel French. Reverend Daniel, I think people who are interested in the coronavirus and the Church of England and our curious cyborg relationships are going to be quite interested in this episode. What do you think?
Well, can a cyborg catch COVID? It's the ultimate, the ultimate existential question in this daft age.
Yeah, there would be a crossover of those two conversations. Maybe they can bleed into each other.
Yes. Do robots need masks?
Do androids dream of electric sheep? Is that famous Philip K. Dick, isn't it? That could be. Do androids dream of contracting COVID? It's not a very good joke, but yes, I like this. I like this idea. There have been, of course, many animals who have apparently caught the coronavirus. I've got my dog here. He seems quite healthy, but you never know what's going on inside, do you? Cats as well. I think cats.
Have you tested him?
I've not tested him. Perhaps I should. Perhaps he is a plague carrying dog. I mean, he's pretty filthy, to be honest. I found him with his head in the bin earlier today, and then he growled at me when I tried to chasten him. He was.
I think he should self-isolate.
Yes, I think he should as well for a long time, and he should think about his crimes. But yes, no, animals very, very dangerous, Daniel. They're riddled. They're riddled with the coronavirus, so we should be very, very careful that we don't pet anyone else's dogs.
Such is the state of Gaia these days.
The state of Gaia is very, very, very poor indeed, very plague-ridden. But yes, no, I won't do this funny accent anymore.
No, I was intrigued.
Well, I've been doing this for so long. This is the 39th episode, and I always try and think of new ways to introduce it. And I thought, oh, what if I do a funny voice today? That might be interesting for people. But I mean, it's not too different to my normal voice. I just went a bit more sort of nasal and posh. So hopefully people found that amusing. But those are the things we're going to be talking about, Daniel. We are definitely going to be talking about all of those things. And I thought maybe after hopefully quite a light-hearted introduction, we should start with the scripture just to sort of focus our conversation a bit. To be honest, Daniel, things are not good this week. I think after a sort of period where, I think lots of people probably felt like, well, maybe things are getting reasonably close to normal. Maybe people didn't necessarily believe that they were going to go back to normal, but they nevertheless felt a bit more normal. I think things this week, developments have been quite disturbing, and we'll talk about that.
Yes,
the
bad cop has been in ascendancy.
Yeah, the behavioural psychology nudge units are really out in force, aren't they? And it's it can be
the empire has struck back.
Yeah, exactly. We're at episode 5 level of the coronavirus, but in all seriousness, I think it is very difficult for people, and people do feel very scared at points, and people feel anxious and depressed. I certainly do. We're going to discuss some stuff later on, and I have to say, I was feeling pretty down last night when I was reading about it, and we on this program, we try and have a bit of a joke and make light of it, and try and help people feel a bit better that way. But ultimately, as followers of Christ, we believe that God gives us peace, and that it's God who can help us when we face difficulties. And so I thought I just read out the 121st Psalm and offer some brief thoughts on it. So I'll read. It's a very short psalm and quite famous as well. Not Psalm 23 level, but sort of probably number 3 or 4 in the Psalm charts, I would say, if Psalm 23 is number 1. But anyway, I'll read it out. Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. In that first line of this psalm, I lift up my eyes to the hills. It's actually got a sort of quite beautiful ambiguity to it, I think, because in a way, and I think the way that it's often interpreted is that the lifting up my eyes to the hill is sort of looking for the Lord to sort of come over the hill to help. But there's also a sense in which it might be the case that the psalmist is looking up to the hills and wondering what might be coming over them, that it might be something dangerous, something that's unexpected and difficult to deal with. Perhaps something that's life-threatening.
I've lost you, the recording.
You still there, Daniel? Are you there, Daniel? I can see you now.
Yes. Yeah, you were frozen for a second. So.
Frozen in time. Sorry, I'll just carry on with that. So it might be the case that it's that the person is looking for the Lord to come over the hills, but it might also be the fact that there's something unexpected and dangerous coming over the hills as well. And I think a lot of people feel like that at the moment. I certainly do. It's like you look to the hills, and it's and from whence does my help come? When is something good going to happen? When is something positive going to come to us? And I think for many people, for the last 18 months, what we've been hoping for is some good news, some positivity, and some kind of affirmation of our ability to live in a way which is normal. And it seems like all you ever get from the media, the mainstream media, the news, the government, is this sort of relentless fear-bringing negativity. And it's certainly been a week like that. And so,
arousal sells news, isn't it? And even depressing arousal, bad news sells.
Yeah.
And media outlets, many of them will no doubt be programmed in a way to respond to that, to chase the sell.
Yeah.
If that ups the sales of your newspaper,
yeah,
then the more you can throw at people, the better.
Absolutely. So we've got the government, using these kind of behavioral psychologists, these nudge units, and then we've got the media who are chasing the stories, chasing the clicks in the social media age, driving up their revenue by driving up clicks, essentially. And as you say, bad news sells, if it bleeds, it leads type stuff. And so if we place our focus in that direction, and I'm not saying, we shouldn't know what's going on, or we should be ignorant of what's going on. But if we place our focus there and we place our hope there, then I'm afraid at the moment it is going to lead to very, very high levels of stress and anxiety and depression. So I guess for myself, I'm just sort of reminding myself that I want to have my focus primarily on good things, primarily on the Lord and all the good things he brings into my life. And when I have my focus in that way, I feel a lot happier. I feel a lot more peaceful and a lot more at rest within myself. And it is a difficult balance, isn't it, Daniel? Because, as I say, we don't want to be completely sort of ignorant of what's going on. And, indeed, we make this podcast and everything. We're very sort of engaged with the news and everything like that. But at the same time, if you sort of, I don't really know how to describe it, but if you sort of give your heart to it, if you look for your hope in it instead of in Christ, it leads you to a very dark place. I don't know what your sort of experience of that kind of thing is.
I remember in the late 80s, so the early 90s, when the first Iraq war emerged, and on the back of that came CNN chicken noodle news, and it's rolling 24-hour broadcasts, which we'd never really seen anything like. And I was a university student then, and student common rooms were playing this rolling news from various outlets like CNN, BBC, what have you. And a bit like on the internet, you can end up doom scrolling. You're just sat there in a zombie state, receiving this stuff, gorging on it. We weren't built to receive information like this. Our brains are not designed to receive 24-hour rolling bad news.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that how many parishioners I bump into who've said since March a year ago, they just don't listen to the news, don't watch and people who have parishioners who were avid news readers and would have a diet of Radio 4, BBC News, Newsnight, a broadsheet, none of it. But I know others who've sadly gone the other way. Yes, are responding to this negative nectar, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not good. It's not healthy. We barely watch the news here.
Yeah. I've cut myself off from it completely. I occasionally listen to a bit of talk radio, but apart from that, almost nothing at all. Because it does lead nowhere. And so if anyone is seeking comfort from Scripture, Psalm 121 is a good place to go and to meditate on that and to bring your cares to the Lord and fix the eyes of your heart upon Him.
There's fabulous musical renditions of it. It's a great sort of spiritual. My wife for a while ran a gospel choir here in Salcombe, and I think that was one of my favourite pieces that choir used to do.
Really?
If you went on Spotify, YouTube, there's some really tremendous versions of it.
Wow, fantastic. Do you know any of the composers of those, Daniel, for a recommendation?
No, sorry, no. Ignorant was really beyond that, but just to say, go and enjoy the text, but enjoy the music also.
Yeah, indeed.
We all need our hearts lifting.
We do, absolutely. Let's start with an email, shall we, Daniel? I got a really good email last night around the time I was engaging with the old news. This one's from Mike, and it sort of mentions a number of things that are relevant this week. So it says, "Dear chaps, I'm having an angry day today." And my children have those quite frequently at the moment. Jamie and I met very briefly just before the last Saturday London March. At the weekend, I went to the protest in Wimbledon. I didn't realise there was one, actually. It was a really poor turnout, which was disappointing. I met a few lovely people, which was great, but took part in a worrying conversation between myself, a nurse, and a care home worker regarding mandatory vaccines. Since then, it has been confirmed that legislation will be introduced to mandate jabs to people who work in care homes, and the domestic passport scheme will be pushed via events and businesses. I'm a little worried about the implications for my job, but I'm also worried about the level of othering that has clearly been stepped up and that I am starting to experience. I've also just learned that business leaders have been meeting at Westminster to partake in Faustian pacts. Nothing new there. Businesses that attract young people are to be used to target them through mobile vaccination units. So 18-year-olds are going to be approached at places like Alton Towers and music festivals. Large corporations and operators have willingly signed up. This all seems to be increasing in pace at a time when we're seeing very strong correlations between facts and cases in many countries, and also learn of the nanoparticles, graphene, concentrating in the ovaries. Could these young women be at risk? I know you guys like to opt for incompetence over malice, but this is also reckless and subversive. It must be evil, ? On a related subject, today we hear of the fallout of the racist abuse related to the football. Outrage at a level that immediately sparked my suspicion. Lo and behold, Johnson is to meet social media leaders to tackle hate speech. We know this will end in further censorship of all manner of thought crime that the globalists find counterproductive. One last note. Our vicar has sent an email about church post 19th. I don't know what that means, the 19th, or any of that sentence, actually.
19th of July, probably, after Freedom Day. What church? I think he's talking about what church will look like after Freedom.
You know, when I thought when it said post, I thought it meant, you know, like mail, not like after. Anyway, stupid, Jamie. We are to use the hand sanitizer we are to use the hand sanitizer post, our new font, he says in question mark, and wear masks until we are settled and when we depart. He ends with quotation, some will think the wearing of masks to come to enter church might be a little onerous. I disagree. It is a very practical example of love thy neighbour. I feel as if the implication being made here is that if you don't wear a mask, you're disrespecting your fellow congregants. Anyway, sorry to vent. Stay strong, fellas. Mike. Thanks so much, Mike. Really good email. And Daniel, I'd like to start. I'd like to cover a number of things that he talks about there. I'd like to start by talking about the football, which happened, of course, on Sunday evening, was it? Yeah, so England lost again in the final this time. So they got to the final, but they lost in the final on penalties. Did you watch the football, Daniel? Did you watch?
I have to say, I watched the last few minutes of it. It's not really my thing, but my son was particularly keen. As a self-avowed Scotsman, I won't tell you which side he was championing. There was slight eyebrow raising in the French family at that. But anyway, so I watched. I came in just at the sort of penalties bit, I think, really. But I gathered. I've not really followed this story at all. So this would be a good segue for you to kind of explain what the racist part of the racist additional story, isn't there?
I will mansplain to you. Can you mansplain to another man, or is it just man to woman?
Vicar-splaining.
I will vicar-splain.
Yeah.
Although, it might not be what most vicars would say, what I'm about to say. But what happened was the Gareth Southgate man, who's the manager of the England team, he brought on 2 players right at the end of the football, right at the end, just to take penalties because they'd obviously practiced, and these 2 were apparently the best penalty takers in the whole England squad, right? So we ended up with these 5 penalty takers. Now the first 2 penalty takers scored, and it was great because we were winning. And then the next group, the 3 who took the 3rd, 4th, and 5th penalties, they all missed, and then we lost. And if only one of them had scored, we would have still been in it. If 2 of them had scored, we would have won. So it was very disappointing. Now, the controversy is that these 3 players, who missed were all black, and they have apparently received racist abuse on Twitter. Now, I say apparently because I haven't seen any of the racist abuse, so I can comment as to whether there has actually been any racist abuse, or who it was who was doing it, or where it came from, or whether they were bots or real people, or whether they're English or lived in China or whatever. I've got absolutely no idea. But they apparently were racially abused on Twitter. Now, there was a further twist in the story because Marcus Rashford, who you might have heard of because he was actually given an OBE for, I don't really know what he did, but he pressured the government to start free school meals,
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I don't think that he is familiar with the anarcho-capitalism of Rothschild. So he's kind of, he's obviously leaning more towards the sort of, towards that view that the state should be feeding all children all the time. Anyway, so he wrote a letter or something, an email maybe, to the Prime Minister and publicized it, and there was this big thing. And he was made into this this sort of, this figure of great virtue. And he was given an OBE, and he was also given an honorary doctorate by the University of Manchester. So but you can't call yourself doctor, actually, to be fair, if you're given an honorary doctorate. You have to have a
Terry Wogan did.
Did he really?
Hmm.
Well, he called himself Dr. Terry Wogan.
Hmm. Donald Trump didn't when he got one at the university where I was chaplain at. I actually missed having lunch with him.
Really?
Yeah.
Which university?
Robert Gordon's University, Aberdeen.
Wow.
Yeah, I was gone a few months before he received his honorary doctorate, but they always sat the honorary doctorate person next to the chap. I sat next to quite a few luminaries like Terry Waite.
Terry Waite.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you'd have been the chaplain at the
Trump didn't use the honorary doctorate,
No.
which was, in fact, they took it away from him a few years later.
Well, you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to, Daniel. You're not supposed to use the honorary doctorate. That's an honorary doctorate. It's not a real doctorate. Anyway, so he was given a doctorate, etc. And there's a mural where he lives, or where he's from, right? There's a mural of him. And I've got the story here. I'm just going to have a look at it. So there was a mural of Marcus Rashford. It's quite a large mural where he comes from in Withington, which I don't know where that is from, whether that's in London or I'm not really sure. But anyway, so it was defaced. Very bad. It was defaced. People were upset that he missed the penalty. And but there was then an enormous demonstration of anti-racists. They all went down there. They posted messages of support and lots of Black Lives Matter. I'm looking at it now. Black Lives Matter, lots of hearts, etc., etc., and all sorts of messages of support. And then the person who did the mural came and redid it, the bit that was all defaced and everything, and that they've actually raised like a huge amount of money for the person who did the mural, which apparently is going to go towards future projects. I forget how much it was. It was quite a lot of money, actually. But yeah, lots of they're all down there taking the knee and waving the Black Lives Matter flags around, etc.
I've really missed out on this.
This is apparently, yeah, well, it's apparently, oh no, I think it was, I'm not sure whether this is Manchester or not, but apparently this has ignited an anti-racist movement. So there is now a new anti-racist movement coalescing around Dr. Marcus Rashford, OBE. And to be fair, the other two, Saka is he's only 19. So and Sancho, he's like 22. So they missed as well, but I guess they didn't have any murals to deface. But anyway, so there's a huge thing going on here with, again, this sort of, I know you say you haven't been aware of it, but all this hand wringing on TV again. Oh, we're so racist. This just highlights how systemically racist we are as a nation. And we cannot have this kind of abuse happening in our nation. And we had I think it was the weather forecaster, or was it the news person on the show that Richard Madeley does now? I think it's the one that, what's his name, used to be on, the man who was always just shouting.
Piers Morgan.
Yeah, that one. So the news forecaster actually broke down in tears because he was so sad about all the racism. And then Richard Madeley had to actually sort of console him live on air and say, "Come on now, you've got a news program to do. We're all sad about all the racism, but you have to read the news," type thing. So yeah, Daniel, you probably can tell from my tone that I think that this is this is largely ridiculous. So for a start, this happens quite frequently. People who live in England might have noticed that England keep on losing football matches at these major tournaments. David Beckham was sent off for kicking an Argentinian player, I think it was, I can't remember even which tournament it was. I think it was like the quarterfinals of maybe it was a 2002 World Cup. And he was basically, we didn't have cancelling back then, but he was cancelled basically, and he was, he had to be under armed guard and have 24/7 surveillance, and people were threatening him and sending like death threats to him and all kinds of stuff. I'm not saying this is okay, but I'm just saying this does happen. It does happen, right? And the thing about, one of the things I find difficult about this, as I indicated earlier with the whole Twitter thing, it seems strange to me to say, well, because there have been some racist tweets on Twitter, that sort of means that the UK, this is some kind of indication that the UK as a whole is systemically racist, when those tweets could have come from absolutely anywhere. And we know that there are millions of bots on Twitter which are there in order to, you know, they're people who are employed by, for example, the Chinese government in order to bring about political purposes. There may be bots who are, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're bots who are planted by the British government. Wouldn't surprise me at all. So taking Twitter as an index of the state of race relationships in Britain, I think is you know, it's neither here nor there really. And then the other thing about this thing about, well, if they deface the mural, now, and I'm not saying it's okay to deface a mural because you know, I don't support that kind of thing, but the implication is that it must be racist. But why can't people just be upset that the guy missed a penalty? You know, why can't, and I'm not saying it's okay, I'm not saying that makes defacing the mural okay, but is any abuse directed to somebody who's not white?
And was the mural, was there sort of racist remarks put on it?
I don't think so. I mean, I've read this article in the Daily Mirror, and I can't see that there were racist remarks actually written on it. I think it was just defaced. I think it was just part of it was kind of just spoiled, really. So I don't know. I mean, I may be wrong. I honestly, I may be wrong. And I'm not saying that there's no racism at all in the UK. I'm just saying it seemed like somebody, I mean, honestly, Daniel, I didn't notice that the 2 white guys scored and the 3 black guys missed. It didn't even occur to me. But then when I started hearing about all this stuff, it's almost like an inevitability, isn't it? Like, this is going to become one of those stories where somebody says something about, well, apparently somebody tweets something on Twitter which is racist, and then it's sort of indicative of the fact that we are, as a nation, you know, we are systemically racist, etc., because this kind of thing keeps happening. But there's a kind of inevitability about it where you almost think, I wonder, could this not happen? I mean, how could this not happen? Almost. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, is it going to become a yearly event?
Yeah, it's like people want it to happen. It's like a kind of, you know, it's a kind of it's a sort of self-fulfilling expectation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a sort of revolutionary mechanism, isn't it? That the revolution has to be continued.
Yeah. It's like you know, that sort of impulse which is within liberalism, where, you know, it's all the sort of identity of liberalism is a kind of activist identity, isn't it? It's about, like, we've got to have equality over here, we've got to have injustice righted over here, and we've got to keep doing that in order to bring about, you know, a more just society. The problem is when you get in a society where, you know, there aren't really sort of, you know, massively obvious pockets of discrimination, the liberal impulse is still searching out something, isn't it? It's always searching for injustice, and so it's almost like it has to, injustice and discrimination, and it's almost like it has to create it in order to continue to survive as an ideology. But the problem
war is peace.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard other people talking about this, that saying that this is like, you know, this is more pernicious than it actually seems, that this is a political agenda. Now it's hard to speculate about what kind of political agenda it could be, but I mean, I've heard some people saying that it's a divisive agenda. It's a sort of intentionally divisive agenda that is being pushed forward by the government and the media. Now, it's interesting, in the media, there's all this, people always slating the government and saying, oh, you know, we know the government are never going to do anything. We know the social media companies are never going to do anything about any of this stuff. But, you know, it could be that this actually, you know, it's actually sort of serves the government agenda in some way by sort of atomizing and fracturing society, constantly trying to sort of demarcate us into these different racial groups, and not just racial groups, but other types of groups as well. You know, so in order to maintain greater control over the population or whatever. I mean, I don't really know what I think about that kind of stuff, but I would say that I think that this kind of stuff is highly divisive, and that we've moved out of a period of time, I would say, really, growing up in the 90s, where I think society was, to a very great extent, colorblind. We're moving from that sort of situation. I'm not saying it was perfect, but it was very much the environment I grew up in, to an environment where race is being intentionally pushed on us as a kind of an issue which creates division and discord. I mean, I don't know what your take is on that.
I noticed Calvin Robinson wrote something today. Is that then on the back of this? In the Telegraph, he wrote something on the systemic race. Britain isn't a systemic racist country.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's a theme he's obviously pushed a number of times, but yeah, they gave him a slot today. So yeah,
I yeah. Sorry,
which of course, what's fantastic about him is here's somebody who in the normal run of things, the narrative would be that he would be the one screaming the greatest protests for BLM and all of that, and instead he's got the car in reverse going at high speed. Talking common sense, saying that Britain isn't systemically racist.
Yeah, well, I mean, he says in this article, which I've just found, that this is not indicative of Britain as a society, and he cites as evidence of this the universal condemnation of the racist comments that were made towards these football players. It's. I mean, whatever this. I mean, as I say, I can't comment because none of the news articles have quoted them. But whatever it is obviously a tiny minority of people. If indeed they are, real people who live in the UK. This just, to me, it's completely divorced from, all I can say is it's completely divorced from my experience. I don't know any racists. I've never met any racists. I grew up going to watch football and I never heard any racist language. Literally never. I can never remember. I mean, I remember hearing people swearing and blaspheming and stuff like that. But I don't remember people. I grew up going to watch Tottenham Hotspur. Loads of the players are black, and I don't remember any racist language or anything. It's not to say it doesn't happen. All I'm saying is that it's just so divorced from my experience. And actually, Daniel, I was thinking earlier about this, is that there's a funny parallel between this sort of critical race theory, Black Lives Matter stuff, and the COVID thing, because and I'm just trying to think of how to say this sensitively, but there's a sense in which, if the media weren't telling us this stuff all the time, how aware of it would we be? And for the majority of people, I think they'd be completely unaware of it. In both, like, are there really racists around? I mean, I've never met one, and I don't hear people saying racist things. But the media is saying, not only are there racists around, but the country is actually sort of characterized by racism, and racism is absolutely everywhere. And we've got to make these big changes. There has to be massive censorship in order to stop people being racist. And there's another point as well, is that why are social media companies so good at censoring stuff to do with so-called medical misinformation around COVID? And yet apparently they're not censoring racist stuff. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are.
There's... if you talk to old school journalists, there's clearly been a change in the way that journalism has operated. A sort of the worst of Americanization of journalism has sort of come into the media's way of operating. So, for instance, if I even a broadsheet newspaper and count the number of factual stories against opinion.
Yeah.
My guess is you're probably looking at 2/3 is opinion,
Yeah.
and the rest is, factual stuff.
Yeah.
Usually quite inane, boring news items. Cat found in tree sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But most journalism now is done from home.
Yeah.
By people not out in the field. Some of it is people just making stuff up, opinion, from their laptops and selling it. And you'd find a lot of journalists are freelancing, so they don't have any great allegiance to the kind of hierarchy of editors. So just put out stuff. Oh, this is my opinion on this, and put it in a way as if it's fact. Now that has got to slant the way that we see each other. There's some intellectual laziness on part of our culture, because what we're doing is we're not reading facts and then making our own analysis from that. We're being spoon-fed analysis.
Yeah.
Maybe I've done that in The Spectator, but it tends to be, I think most people know they get it from these opinion pieces. But
I'm sure people love to be spoon-fed by you, Daniel. Daniel, I wanted to ask.
Try my best.
No, your pieces are excellent. But I wanted to ask you about the sort of theological anthropology that's being proposed here in these kind of narratives, because it strikes me as a kind of a sort of parody of a sort of very extreme form of the doctrine of original sin. That we have this kind of stain of racism, which is handed down to us genetically from our forebears. So we might not have been involved in, for example, the empire, but we are still guilty of it. And not only we're guilty of it, but we're still sort of carrying on its legacy on a sort of subconscious level.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of other religiosity around that, isn't there? From shaming, excommunicating, was cancelling. There's all sorts of rituals around this, whether it's kneeling or whatever other gestures. There's a religiosity of it, and I suppose it's part and parcel of as Britain gets less invested in Christianity, less religious, more secular, our religious impulses are drawn in other dimensions, in other ways. I think everyone is religious in one way or another, but not all religions are about God. And our energies, our passions can easily be coalesce around something.
And it strikes.
You see that in the Soviet countries. That they tried to to energize, to take that energy and fabricate it in their own way. And the same thing's happening here in this sort of strange group thing.
And it's not a very nice religion either, in my opinion, because it doesn't have any kind of understanding of grace. So you can't not only do you have this original sin and original guilt, but you can't actually get rid of it. The only way that you can deal with it is by kind of constantly denouncing yourself. So I've got white privilege. I've really got to work on it. I've got to educate myself. And you also have to constantly be apologizing for things that happened in the past, which really have very little to do with you. You may have seen, in fact, you might have shared it with me, but the Church of England this week has said that it's going to apologize for the anti-Semitic expulsion of Jews from medieval England in the 13th century.
Technically, if you were to be denominationally super accurate and geeky, the Church of England didn't exist when this happened. And someone said, well, John Paul II already beat you to it by apologizing for it.
Yeah, all you can do really is apologise as West on behalf of Western Christendom, can't you? So yeah, it does actually, in the Telegraph article I've got here, it does actually make that point. Despite the Church of England not existing in the 13th century, church officials have apologised for the role of the church in England throughout history and its part in stoking anti-Semitism. So it's good to see that the church is, really
Busy.
busy and up to date, very relevant in what it's been up to this week. But the serious point is that it goes back to what I was saying about this thing of denouncing yourself all the time and almost like looking for things. Like in this instance, it's actually, it's really got almost nothing to do with the Church of England, that the Jews were expelled from England in the 13th century.
Who's that? Who's that? The character in 1984, Wilson's friend, who's the
Winston.
He's a sort of Winston's friend. He's a zealot, isn't he, for the party, and he denounces himself at one point, and they both find themselves.
Oh yeah. He was. What was he doing? Was he like muttering to himself or something? I can't.
Yes. The children heard me saying it at supper, sort of thing. And,
And isn't it the kids who denounce him? But then he says they're right to have done so. So it's this really sort of false religiosity, I think, and of course it's a parody of Christianity, isn't it? Because we do believe in original sin. We believe that sin has an effect on us, a power over us, if you like, and that we all sort of inevitably fall into it in many ways. But we also believe in grace as well. And also, I think another thing about original sin, and this might be sort of a point, where you sort of get into talking about technical stuff, but I think there is in most Christian traditions the idea within original sin that human beings are not totally dominated by the power of sin. Now, in more sort of extreme views, like sort of a Calvinistic view, we talk about total depravity and things like that. But most of Christendom has always maintained that human beings, although we've lost a kind of sort of supernatural inclination to righteousness, nevertheless we are inclined in many ways to do good in life, and to be kind and generous, to be moved to pity for our fellow man, to be outraged at injustice, to be aware of the voice of conscience, and so on and so forth. Now we're broken, we're not perfect, but nevertheless, even man in his fallen state still has great capacity to carry out good works and to do good things. It's not enough to be delivered totally from the power of original sin, not by far. And we believe that Christ's death on the cross is the only way that can happen. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that human beings are like totally evil and wicked and incapable of doing good in everything they do. And it's
from another angle, I've just said goodbye to an intern who's an American Eastern Orthodox Christian, and he has rightly reminded us in some of our discussions that from a God point of view, from a cosmic point of view, evil in comparison to the grace and power of God. The grace and power of God are inexhaustible, infinite, majestic. And from that perspective, that which is evil and malign is minuscule. In a similar way in C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, that those taking the day trip up to heaven from hell, from Greytown, find that they are in the presence of giants. That their sin is diminished, their vision is diminished. And I think there's something in the woke culture, the woke and the critical race theory story which diminishes us all, because it does not have that God perspective so everything is blown out of proportion.
Yeah. And what you're saying, it relates to the notion of sin as a privation of, or sin and evil as a privation of being, something which lacks ontological status. So it's actually about a sort of a diminishment to the point of nothing of God's creation. That's what sin actually is. It's a lack of something. It's a lack of righteousness, in the same way as blindness is a lack of sight. it's so sin actually ontologically speaking is nothing, and that's what makes it so pernicious. But it's also what makes it something which can be overcome, and something which is ultimately through Christ transitory. So I think we should move on and talk about COVID stuff. Daniel, you're a bit blocky. I think your internet may be running a little bit slowly. I'm not sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Yeah, it is saying I'm unstable.
Yeah. Well, we all are unstable to some extent, aren't we? So anyway, I'll carry on here, Daniel, and hopefully your internet will right itself a little bit. So the developments in COVID stuff. So basically, we've got a situation now where the government were saying it's going to be Freedom Day on 19th of July. Johnson had been using language of irreversibility. He hopes it will be irreversible. He hopes. But now the rhetorical tone, has changed quite significantly. The government are encouraging big events to use vaccine passports. The Commons voted through mandatory vaccination for care home workers. I think it's in visitors as well. I'm not absolutely sure about that. And in an interesting twist, Johnson has now said that masks, although they are not mandated, they are nevertheless expected. And the London Underground and London Transport, I think in general, actually said masks are going to continue. I got a text from my GP today saying that if I want to go to the surgery after July 19th, I will have to wear a mask. And I expect this is going to happen in lots of other areas. Just one final thing, I heard an interesting interview with Jeremy Hunt, who you may remember, who was a former health secretary, but he said that he's glad Johnson isn't using the language of irreversibility anymore, and he thinks we have a better than evens chance of not returning to lockdown. Another way of putting that would be to say that we've got about a 50-50 chance of returning to lockdown. So, Daniel, I mean, I'm pretty certain you have a similar sort of view to me on this. I mean, it seems to me that what they're doing is they're just, they're trying to fudge this in order to give some kind of semblance that they're removing these measures, but they're actually not removing them at all. What they're doing is they are outsourcing them to businesses and other organizations in order to remove.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is when we were saying this 6 months ago, before this podcast, I'm saying this to people that this is going to be years and years of toing and froing.
Yeah.
And for, oh no, that's you're exaggerating. That's melodramatic. Oh, that's conspiracy theory stuff. Saying no, this is what it's going to be like. This is what we're heading for. And I think Laura Dodsworth picked up as well this on that the behavioural psychologists, boffins in government, have no exit strategy. They have no strategy to invent happiness. They have lots of strategy to impose anxiety.
Yeah.
But there's no reverse gear propaganda.
Yeah.
And that was what excellent book was the whistleblowers who came out and said this. We know how to slap on the negative. We have no idea how to reverse this.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as you say, it's just toing and froing, isn't it? I mean, we get in our heads, and it's very hard to resist it, but we get in our heads, this date, that's going to be the end of it. But it never is the end of it. We know what's going to happen in the winter. They're already preparing us for it. I expect that they'll probably just bridge these summer months through these kind of moves by trying to sort of outsource these measures. And then they may apply mandatory vaccination to other spheres as well. I don't really know. But then in the winter, I mean, who would really say with any confidence that there is not going to be another lockdown in the winter? Like I think it was Mike in our first email, wasn't it? Don't want to get his name wrong. Just check. Yeah, Mike. Like Mike said, we don't really know why they're doing this. It just doesn't really seem to make any sense. Is it something more pernicious than just a kind of a sort of political incompetence and a sort of negative feedback loop involving the government, the media, and the population, with the vested interests of enormous corporations who are massively benefiting from all of this, the media, the social media companies, big pharma? I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I don't know why it's happening, but it clearly is happening. And people are we're just being led along by it. And I don't want to be negative, but I don't see an end to this. I just can't see how, in the current situation, this is ever going to end.
Well, the newspaper articles last week was saying that polling suggests that we have a not dissimilar division as we had in Brexit.
Right.
Well, in terms of, let's say, mask wearing and lockdowns, the kind of COVID cautious in comparison to those like ourselves who want to move on and go back to the normal state of things. That's now the new political divide, not party political, but that's the societal divide. It is roundabout. It is pretty much 51, 52% each, 48 each way.
Well, I mean, that would be significantly better than I'd be hoping, to be honest with you. I mean, it feels very much like to me that the majority of people are sort of okay with this carrying on. And I've had conversations with people where they've said, oh yeah, winter lockdown, that would be fine. So you've got politicians like Johnson talking about, well, justifying the extension of these lockdowns by saying, I want to make sure that this is irreversible. I want to make sure, and that's the justification for the extension of the lockdown. But once the lockdown is extended, then that language just disappears. And it's just, well, we might have to reimpose restrictions. And, Daniel, they're coming unless something changes.
And I suppose my question would be, how does it work financially for the government because surely it must come to a point where the magical money tree begins to look a bit sparse, are we, if that's the case, we're going to have further lockdowns, are we going to have more furloughing?
Yeah.
How much of taxpayers' money is going to be used to prop up? I mean, I think last year it was £1 billion a day.
Yep.
Lockdown was costing. So, do the maths.
This money isn't.
That's extraordinary. That's money that my children will still be paying.
Yeah.
In a generation's time.
Your grandchildren as well. And the thing about this is not real money, and this is there's something sort of fundamentally immoral about the way that not just this government is using money, but the whole concept of borrowing money that's not based on anything. Because when you borrow, there's a sort of ethical implication that you have some kind of intention of giving it back. But the government know that this money, it can never really be repaid in any real way. It's not based on anything. It's just numbers. These are just they're just numbers floating around in the air. This isn't real money. It's not based on anything. It's not gold. It's not silver. It's just a theoretical contract that they've made with banks and businesses to owe them money in perpetuity. Which, as you say, they're not going to be responsible for paying off. It's going to be the people of this country when there's some kind of massive economic downturn. And our children.
Well, if I'm correct, the payments for Britain's payments for the Second World War, the post-Second World War loans.
Yeah,
I think that was all cleared. Only sort of in the late 1980s.
I thought it was later than that.
Maybe it was later, yeah.
I mean, it took a hell of a long time, and we're in a much worse position now. And we're not even out. It's not even finishing. They clearly want to carry on with this. So I honestly, Daniel, I don't know. I mean, this stuff about, the Great Reset and things like that. To be honest with you, I'm just quite open-minded about what could be going on. I really just don't know. We should read about France, because I mean this situation is way worse than what's happening here. I mean, so article in Spectator. What's that? Sorry,
I'm just picking it up now on my laptop here. Yeah.
So in recent days, this is from the Spectator, France has seemed rather normal, etc. But we're told none of it will last. We must vaccinate all of France, says President Macron in his 5th COVID television address. Macron ditched, that's just all scene setting. It was the launch of his re-election campaign. Macron pretended that compulsory vaccination was still an open question, but this was rhetorical dissembling, because there is no question that, in practical terms, it will not only be compulsory, but it will be impossible to conduct a normal life without it. This was the most authoritarian speech delivered by a French president in decades, but wrapped in a nakedly political pitch for 5 more years. We were promised a French version of Build Back Better, but only if we do as we are told, and only if Macron continues to be in charge. The president claimed, with scant justification, that France is now the fastest growing, most attractive economy in Europe. He promised plenty of jam tomorrow, lower taxes, better support for the young, more jobs, better care for the aged, reform of the retirement system. I just, the mind boggles as to how he thinks he's going to actually do any of that stuff. Again, all of it with lower taxes, but all of it dependent, he said, on a summer of vaccination to be enforced with passports. COVID tests will no longer be free to coerce the unvaccinated into accepting jabs. With less than half of France fully vaccinated, vaccination will be now compulsory, starting almost immediately for anyone working in hospitals, then everyone working in care homes. In September, for everyone over 12, vaccines are to be rolled out for middle school and high school pupils. And to mop up any resistance, health passports will become compulsory to get on buses or go to a restaurant. Reinforced frontier controls are to be introduced. The police will be unleashed from September to enforce the new rules. All of this appears to a prelude to a 2-tier society in which liberty and equality is being jettisoned without much debate. The French might have the liberty to refuse the vaccines, but they will risk losing their jobs, forfeiting the right to travel or to buy food. Those with vaccine passports will certainly be more equal than those without. It seems a risky political strategy for Macron. He's evidently calculating that stoking up fear of the Delta variant with promises of a sunlit upland in the future will get him re-elected. And it's a quote from Albert Camus in La Peste, which we've talked about before on this podcast. The one way of making people hang together is to give them a spell of the plague.
No, it's not brave vive la différence, is it? It's more to throw la différence under the autobus.
Yeah, I quite like this quote about this point about liberty and equality. The founding sort of motto of the modern French state. Liberty, equality, and fraternity,
equality,
brotherhood. It's like normally in politics you have a trade-off between liberty and equality. You have if you have more liberty, then you have less equality. If you have more equality, you have less liberty. But here you don't have either. You've got no liberty and you've got no equality. So it's do you have fraternity? I would argue you don't have that either, because you're creating a 2-tier society. So I mean, I'm sort of making light of it, but really, I mean, it's like, it just sounds like a fascist state.
Vichy would be proud.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? So pray for the people of France. I mean, I just feel so sorry for people living in France that they're being
extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, I noted some months ago that Macron is banning homeschooling in France as well, because the state needs to, he said, protect people from religion. People need to be protected from religion, and so the kids have to go to school in order to be protected from their parents' religious beliefs. So.
If the Soviets were still around, they wouldn't need to bother going into France to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's mad, isn't it?
Job done.
Yeah, absolutely mad. Anyway, Daniel, let's not talk about it anymore.
No. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
France. Au revoir. Bienvenue.
Bienvenue. So, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about should we talk? Let's just do a little bit on church stuff, because we really should. We talk about the robot marriage. So lots of people have sent me this image of it's. I believe it's a church, a parish church in Tenterton, in Kent, which is near where I used to live, and it is a picture of the altar of this church, and it has an NHS flag draped over it, and it says NHS we thank you, and it's on the altar at the very front of this church, exactly where the Eucharist would be celebrated. Now Gavin Ashenden, who is a bit of a legend in my opinion, even if he has chosen to leave our church and become a Roman Catholic, but never mind, he is a legend. He writes, "This is a most disturbing photo. It represents the tragic capitulation of the Church of England to the secular zeitgeist. It replaces Jesus and the salvation of our souls with a futile preoccupation with the body, the replacement of the one true God with a fake idolatry." Very, very rhetorically florid and eloquent there, as you would expect from Gavin. Dr. Ashenden, what's your take on this image, Daniel? Do you? What's your reaction to it?
I found it interesting posting it, that there was considerable comment. There was comment from those who were also saying, "Oh well, it's not that bad, is it?" Or it was just a flower festival. What about draping military flags over altars? Isn't that just as bad?
Yes.
I think the thing with military flags being draped over altars is there's a sense in which something is being done to the flag, is being symbolically taken to the altar. In a sense, it's being consecrated. It is going to something greater. Whereas I think this is the other way around. This is a reduction of the altar by the banner.
Yes.
Now, I know you can argue that both ways, but that's my just a rough take on this. What is an altar about? Or whether you want to call it I had some people who told me off and said that the Book of Common Prayer doesn't have altars, it has holy tables or communion tables. Well, whatever. It's still, it is the loci in the majority of our churches for representing or representing the sacrifice of Christ, which is for mankind the one singular event that God wants us to be focused on. So anything that distracts that away, anything that sort of pushes our attentions away from that or diminishes that, really needs to be avoided.
Yep. I mean, it's also just sort of a sickening example of virtue signaling. It's and again, I mean, it's one of those images which perhaps maybe more strikingly than anything we've ever had on the podcast before actually sort of sums up the problem, doesn't it? Instead of being focused on Christ, the message of the gospel, and what the church really has to offer to the world, what we've done is literally replace that with a vain repetition of the empty, shallow, meaningless gesture politics of the culture. Thank you, NHS. Let's give the NHS the George Cross. Let's talk about how great the NHS is. And the other thing about this is it's just, I'm sorry, but it's so naive. Can people not see that this government are using the NHS in order to boost its own popularity? This is how they got elected in the first place. It's how they got all those red wall seats, is by deciding to make themselves the party of the NHS, so that nobody could ever say about the Tories ever again, they don't care about the NHS. That's why they're doing this. That's why all the publicity is out there. That's why we have the Rainbow campaign. That's why Boris Johnson got the Queen to give the NHS the George Cross. It's political.
And I didn't get that. I thought that was really naff. Really, the George Cross should be for individuals. And giving it to a bureaucracy seemed ludicrous. Really, there's so many problems with this. And again, this is one area where the church could contribute an intelligent prophetic voice, and sadly at a hierarchical level doesn't. I still don't really fully get why there aren't even dissenting voices from this, but typically in my church, I've regularly prayed for doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, the local GP and so on, but I've never prayed for the NHS, just as I wouldn't pray for private healthcare providers or private veterinary companies or and so on. Because these structures have. They're not all saintly in the things that they present and do, are they? We know that there are all sorts of issues in the NHS. And in the last year, we were called to have an inverse relationship with the NHS, that we were supposed to protect it rather than it protect us. And I have a fundamental issue with that. I have other issues which some people may think, well, this is a bit hard, but the NHS is one of the major providers of abortion in this country. And the NHS is filled with all sorts of semi-useless managers paid at extraordinary. The gravy train is considerable. I'm not sure it's the most efficient of organisations. Look at the moment. The new health secretary has apparently said that he was completely gobsmacked at the fact that 7 million people are on waiting lists at the moment. When you look at the other side of it, why is this organisation getting a medal? It's a mixture of good and bad. And do we have to look at everything in this sort of silly, romantic, propagandist way?
Well,
does it help? Does it really help? If you're sitting waiting for a knee operation, you've probably got 2-3 years of agony because the organisation is so dysfunctional at the moment.
Well, it's been turned into an idol, hasn't it? In this image, this is literally an idol, and it's a false idol. It's a false god, because what it's offering to us, it's not actually providing. It can't provide salvation from death anyway, because we all die eventually. But it can't even do it, the service it's ostensibly meant to offer very well, particularly at the moment. And the NHS is the third biggest employer in the world. It's got over 1 million employees, and it's so. Other people, I don't want to get into this too much, but I completely agree with you, Daniel. There's no reason to think that this state-run hospital service is any better than any other service that any other country has. And in many other countries, I would argue they do have far more efficient healthcare services, which are partially privatized. This idea that people have that because it's state-run, that somehow makes it amazing. It's just, I just don't see that. I just think that's lacking in empirical reality. And as I say, I think that this is really a political thing. This has been manufactured by the Tories, and ultimately it's very manipulative. So for the church, I know this is just one image, but the church really have gone out of their way to endorse this viewpoint. And then again, the other point you make is that we're still being told, I mean, you said it was like last year, but actually we're still being told that we have to protect the NHS. So again, it's like a false idol in that sense as well. It's like one of these idols of wood and stone that can't save you. You have to protect it. You have to shield it because it's so vulnerable that it can't deliver for you. But you have to ask yourself in that case, like what good is something if the thing it's supposed to do is actually, you have to do that for it. It's a very sort of ironic relationship that we have with it. But a shocking image, really. We had a really good article by Alison Pearson today, and I do want to talk about robot marriage in a minute. But she is talking about the all the stuff that's going on in the Church of England. She quotes who I didn't actually know about this, but in May, the Bishop of St David's, Joanna Pemberthy, tweeted, wrote a post on Twitter about perceived threats to the Welsh Assembly from the Conservative Party. She tweeted, "They say that this is not true, but we know better. Just think of the lies of #Boris Johnson. Never trust a Tory." Talks about apparently Archbishop Justin apologized. Well, he didn't apologize. He said he was deeply embarrassed by that and that it was unacceptable. But then she goes on to talk about the Myriad initiative, which we covered on the podcast last week. Well, I don't know whether you listened to it, Daniel, but you no doubt know about this. And it's a very, I won't read any of this article really out, but it's a very excoriating article, which I'll put on the show notes. She suggests that we have to do something about this. And she says that the clergy and the people do have a say, and this is the moment for a rebellion. We need to assist the parishes to withstand the assault from the diocese. She's talking about, diocese selling off our buildings and reducing stipendiary priests, which have been described as key limiting factors. That's you and me, Daniel, by the way, just in case you had forgotten. We are the key limiting factors. And you can go to savetheparish.com. I've only just heard of this, which offers a number of ways to help. Write to your MP. Parochial church council consent is needed for the closure of churches. Don't give it. The church buildings belong to the parish. So does the vicarage if they haven't sold it yet. You can ring fence. Did you know this, Daniel? You can ring fence your parish assets and put them in a trust out of reach of the diocese. The parish share is voluntary, a free will offering. So you definitely don't have to give it to a hierarchy that wants to starve your parish and its wonderful church resources, so that Ray and Brenda can host Holy Communion in their hot tub. And then she sort of carries on with it. But yeah, it's a great article, isn't it? Do you have any thoughts on any of this stuff, Daniel?
And around about Easter, she messaged me looking for stuff. She's been working. Yeah, she's been working on this, I think, for a while. A number of articles along this. I think I threw my penny's worth in, but not for this one. But yeah, there was an Easter piece she did where she asked me just for some instances and data. No, it's really great, isn't it, to have a prominent journalist working for us in this way, actually. Though I know the Church Times will no doubt, in Friday's edition, call this another instance of the rascally, malign Telegraph Spectator axis of evil.
Oh, did they? The Church Times ran this. What did they say?
Oh, it's one of the few bits that I do actually look at is the media analysis for the week,
right?
They have a particular axe to grind against the Telegraph Spectator axis of evil.
Right. Did they mention you?
No, but I think I've come under usual suspects.
Right.
Along with people like Marcus Walker, who's written a similar sort of piece last week in the printed version Spectator. And Peter Anthony as well has done a whole series, hasn't he, on all things lawful.
Yeah, all things lawful and honest, yeah. You know what? Yeah. I'd love it if the Church Times would mention this podcast. They haven't done so yet. They're probably waiting.
Take it as an insult, really.
Do you think they're going to do a big feature on us at some point? I just love it. They said, oh, Irreverent have been talking about us, our article or whatever. But there is actually, I found this, lead a comment on key limiting factors. But I don't think they mention either you or me, Daniel.
No.
So please, Church Times, if you want to do a feature on us, we're up for it for sure. That would be great. So key limiting factors, Daniel, you and me, buildings, education, all of it. But we won't go into that again.
Yes, just do it all online.
Yes, well, then you just need one service. And you could just take turns. There are loads of priests, so you could just take turns.
I find the whole Sunday thing a bit of a nuisance anyway.
It is. I'd like to do other things on Sunday morning. In fact, there are quite a few things you could be doing with your Sunday morning. Right, Daniel, let's go on to...
Should we marry robots?
Oh, we need to read your spoof out quickly. So let's do this quickly. So we had a picture of in Ely Cathedral. They've got this planet Earth, which is just hanging there, which is called Gaia, which is like the Earth goddess, right? And there's a picture on the front of the Church Times of people being ordained underneath this Gaia planet thing, and it looks absolutely weird beyond belief. I mean, really really weird. Anyway, so you've written a nice spoof here, Daniel. So
I haven't got it. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, if you don't mind. Solcombe Church to host Death Star Week. A 10-foot replica of the Death Star, the first Death Star, will be suspended in our church and accompany a series of talks on transhumanism. Events include sliding down a chute to a room full of garbage, lock-in to find the rebels' secret plans of the space station, sermon, how to get over your cyborg father killing your best friend in a sword duel. That should be lightsaber duel, surely. The week will conclude with a special service where we blow the whole thing up using paper airplanes. Please come wearing imperial face masks. Please note that the Requiem for Alderaan has been cancelled. You know what, Daniel? I think the Requiem for Alderaan, I think that's going to be the title of this episode.
It is, isn't it?
Brilliant. Brilliant. Love that.
No, down to ween.
People who don't watch Star Wars will be alienated, but that is a price that is worth paying. Right, as promised. Like, everyone's been waiting for this. Now we've got about 15 minutes left in total. This is the story of the week. I do robots. Hang on a second, Daniel. I wanted to. Do you remember before?
This melted my electronic heart.
When we were reading about transhumanism, right?
Yes.
Almost started playing the Terminator theme tune.
It didn't really work from my end, did it?
No, but I've got it here. So I'm going to start playing it while I read this, okay?
Oh.
Getting married to robots will be considered normal by the end of the century. Dr. David Levy argues sex and relationships with androids could even be common in the next 30 years. He predicts robotic sex dolls will become so intelligent they will develop personalities and be able to hold conversations on any level of sophistication. The author of the book Love and Sex with Robots reckons some people could stop having relationships with human beings because they prefer cyborgs. Dr. Levy, 76, says they could even replace sex workers. The Brit, who has a PhD in social robotics, explained, just as it is now accepted in most countries we can marry people of the same sex, so will sex robots become accepted. People will eventually be falling in love with and having sex with robots. I think the first sophisticated sex robot will be around by 2050, but it will be another 50 years before they're commonplace and people accept it's normal for a friend to say, I'm in love with a robot and I'm thinking of marrying it. He was speaking ahead of the 6th International Congress on Love and Sex with Robots to be held remotely next month. They've had 6 already.
Held remotely?
They've had 6 international congresses on love and sex with robots already. And they're still like, what, 30 years away from actually having the real thing. I think that's the end of the story. So I love this theme tune, by the way, from the Terminator. It really. I watched those films when I was probably too young, and I was absolutely terrified, particularly by the T-1000 in Terminator 2: Rise of the Machines. So Daniel, I mean, what do you think about this story then? I mean, what does this tell us about our culture, that we're talking about getting married to robots and having sex with them? I mean, what's your view on this?
Well, just as a side, I wondered, in the robot marriage, is it going to be a prayer book liturgy, or common worship? Because if it's a prayer book liturgy, then one of them has to obey the other, and the other has to worship.
Yes. Will there be a hierarchical relationship between the
yes
and the human?
Yeah. Who will be obeying who?
Yes, I've just shared the picture there.
Yes, gosh, she's a stunner, isn't she?
You've got to ask yourself, Daniel, is this article real or is this a joke? I mean, I'm really not sure.
Is it the summer silly season?
I honestly don't. I honestly just don't know, because the last line on that, he was speaking ahead of the 6th International Congress on Love and Sex with Robots to be held remotely. I'm wondering whether we're being had here. I really am. Yeah. But at the same time, like,
some people in Silicon Valley are just enjoying life too much, I think.
Yeah, but to talk seriously about this, like the whole idea of sex dolls and things like that, that is real, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was real. And it's like another one of these things where, in absolutely all seriousness, my view is that as our culture untethers itself more and more from its Christian foundation, it's inevitable that our institutions will become more fluid and flexible, and they'll move in directions that are unforeseeable. So I think the whole just to give an example from a different, though sort of related field, the whole transgenderism thing, that wasn't really a thing sort of 20 years ago. Now it is. I heard an interview with a man who is white and had lived in South Korea for some time, and he's decided that inwardly he's Korean, and so he's a Korean man, in his view, trapped in a white man's body. And so now he's had plastic surgery to make him look more Korean, and now he wants people to say, you are Korean. So this is transracial. Oh. Yeah. So this thing with, like, marriage can be marriage. So it used to be the case that marriage was understood as between a man and a woman. Now it can be between a man and a woman and a woman. There's nothing to stop this becoming marriage between 3 men, or a man and 2 women, or a woman and 2 men. Why could you not get married to a robot if the robot is sophisticated enough? I mean, I have questions about the technology. I don't really know whether this is possible. I don't think it is to any great degree. But why could you not get married to a robot? Why could you not get married to an animal? If the definition of marriage is not something which is given to us, but is something that we create, then why not get married to a robot? I don't know what you think about that.
Well, as we leave Christendom behind and sail off to new lands, it seems that one of our prime destinations is Siberia, Cyberia, and the disembodied self. That what Christianity offered us was a very grounded sense of our bodies and of the material world. Yes. Christ becomes one of us. And yet what we've got now is an emerging idea that we would be better, we would be better if we were in other bodies. We would be better if our existence was mainly online.
Yeah.
We are, for all this world being, for all secularity being materialistic, it's actually very anti-material.
Yeah.
And I think this is just another expression of that. What the serpent is offering us in this instance is a simulacrum
Yep.
of life, where we're just going through the motions. If we're just going through the motions with a robot, well, what's the difference?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like the material. It's almost like in order to save the material, you have to have something that's immaterial. Or another way of putting it is that in order to save the natural, you have to have something which is supernatural. You have to have something which kind of, a sort of reality, which it provides a foundation for it. Whereas if you only have the material, then the material becomes like a kind of phantasm. It becomes just a subjective impression upon the individual psyche.
There's something that you have to become released from, to find your true self.
Yeah.
And maybe your true self is an avatar online.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's some kind of, it's some various procedures where, like in the last instance, you attempt to change your race.
Yes.
I thought the Korean story was interesting in that the guy involved, why did is being Korean identified purely by a racial type? Because we've been very keen in this country, that you can be black and British. So why is it that you have to be Oriental to be Korean? Why can't you be Western, white and Korean?
Right. I see what you mean.
Do you know? I just thought that in itself is right. It's a bit like a lot of the stuff that goes on in the LGBTQ plus conversations. Yeah. That in the end, no one seems to know quite what anything or anybody is, or should be. It's all everything's this throws everything up in the air.
Yeah. Well, there's often a kind of contradiction between that kind of internal subjective, I am X because I feel I'm X. So that would be characteristic of a kind of transgender view. But then a sort of, as we talked about before, a sort of feminist or even just a sort of normal view of what a woman is would say that a woman is a biological reality. So it's actually an objective reality. So you've got a kind of dissonance there within sort of Western liberalism, and really those two things are, in my view, they're just totally contradictory. I just don't see how you can affirm both of those things at the same time. That there's an objective biological reality, which is being a woman, but nevertheless you can be a woman because you have some kind of subjective feeling that you are actually a woman, even though your biology doesn't correspond to it. So I think you're right about that. And the other thing about the online thing is, the online thing gives you the capacity to manipulate the simulacrum. Now that's not far away from the Matrix. We're getting much, much closer to this thing where you can just plug yourself in, and then the online reality is more real than the actual real world. And this kind of science fiction stuff, it's becoming more and more relevant all the time, and we'll have to have a conversation about Brave New World at some point.
It's been said that the boomers gave us Friends, Chandler and co.
Yeah.
Gen X turned around and rejected that and said, no, what we want is the Matrix, or what we fear is the Matrix.
Yeah.
What we have from the TV series Friends really in itself is a simulacrum of life.
Yes.
It's a fake. It's a fake reality. No one lives that kind of life.
Yeah.
But that's what
they never work, and they have these amazing apartments, and they have sex with each other all the time. No one ever gets pregnant or an STD, and they just live this entirely charmed life. Yeah.
And that was that was in a sense was the proposal of the writers who were in the heart of the Boomer Revolution and the 60s revolution, to say, our revolution has little consequences to the way of life or to your, to your earthly happiness. And I think the Matrix as a film, it has its problems, but I think it turns around and slaps that in the face and says, well, no, actually, reality is more complex and grittier, and our sense of control and where we're going it isn't, the whole kind of myth of progress needs to be questioned.
Yep. It's definitely
gone deep. We've gone deep.
Yeah, we have indeed. Yeah, and it's something to ponder, isn't it? This thing. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about Blade Runner here, aren't we? Because Blade Runner is about love between humans and cyborgs. What are they? Replicants, they're called in Blade Runner. So it raises the question in a very profound way of what it actually means to be a human being as opposed to just a robot that mimics a human being. But
did you ever see the sequel?
Yeah. Did you?
Yeah, we seem to imply that pretty much everyone was a replicant.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought the sequel was really good, actually, I have to say. I thought it ended a bit weakly, but I thought it was pretty good on the whole, considering that it's a sequel to probably one of the greatest science fiction films ever. In many ways, one of the greatest films ever, I would say. But Daniel, I think we're going to leave it there this week because we've come to the agreed ending point. Shall one of us say a prayer? Do you want to do a prayer or a blessing or something, or shall I do it?
Well, why don't you do it? I've tended always to do it, so I think we should enjoy a prayer from you, Father.
Oh yeah, no problem at all.
And you're appropriately dressed, whereas I'm in my Alderaan.
Oh, I just realised. So remind me, what was the title of the show going to be? The Requiem for Alderaan is cancelled.
Requiem for Alderaan.
The Requiem for Alderaan has been cancelled, I think we should call it. Right, yeah, let's do a prayer and then we'll finish. Dear Lord, we commit this conversation to you. We ask for your blessing and your peace to be with us as we finish, and with all of our listeners. We pray for your wisdom, for your guidance, for your help, for everyone in these times. We do pray for the Church of England, for our leaders, for our bishops, for our clergy, for our lay folk. We pray that you would lead this church into your will and into your purposes. We pray for our nation. We pray for a turning of hearts and minds to Christ. We pray for our leaders that you would help them to lead us in ways of righteousness and goodness and truth, and away from maliciousness and lies and mendacity and foolishness. And we ask for your blessing now, finally, to be with us through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. I enjoyed that a lot. And I was just going to say, just to finish, we should have a conversation about Brave New World at some point, because I've almost finished my second rereading of it. And it's an astonishing book, really. Very, very profound. And be good to discuss. So maybe at some point we could do a kind of podcast extra or something.
Christianity without tears.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really, really profound book. But yeah, we'll be in touch about that. But really good to talk to you, Daniel, as always. And thanks to all our listeners for listening. And we'll be with you again very soon. Thank you.